What's going on, everyone? So we have a fun video today. We're going to be talking about some colorless cards here, and I honestly didn't really think that I would really be talking about these two cards in particular. As you can see, the first one on screen, Restock, as I first dove into Star Wars Unlimited. But with the recent Florida 5K and Gee taking down the whole thing with Vader Blue, we have seen a massive surge of control decks. And rightfully so, they are very well situated in the meta and they do perform quite well. And Restock has been the answer, alongside an answer to the control decks for aggro matchups a little bit later on in the video, and another colorless card if you want to pick up your restocks, or the other one we're going to mention later on in the video, or any of the other cards that we're going to talk about in relation to the colorless cards. Use my TCG player link in the description down below, and let's dive into Restock. So why has this card become not only a sideboard staple, but actually a main deck consideration for me and my Vader Blue list? Because I've been interacting with a lot of control decks, at least in the field that I've been playing against, I at least have one Restock main deck, potentially two. In Gee's list, I believe he ran one main deck Restock in his Florida 5K list. The reason we are running Restock is because in your control matchups, there are not enough threats. There's not a high enough threat density in the control mirror to actually win using your units. You always, or almost always, come down to a mill out game. The only exception to that is in some cases I've seen like Emperor Palpatine steal your units, and then you actually have like this massive turn. But with the exception of like Emperor Palpatine control, Restock has been the answer. One of the reasons why is vigilance is also one of the reasons why control has been popping up more and more. They're almost always vigilance based, not the card, but the aspect, because of vigilance, as well as all the other controlling cards that you're going to be getting from being in vigilance, or I will say blue from now on, not to confuse the card with the aspect. But because of vigilance coming into play and being able to not only keep you alive against the aggro decks with the defeating units, dealing healing damage, but also being able to control the board, potentially make your opponent have to deal with your threats a little bit more with the shield token on like a Vader, for example. But actually, the most important mode in that control mirror, discarding 6 cards from an opponent's deck, or milling 6 is what I'm going to call it because I am from Magic. But discarding 6 cards from an opponent's deck is extremely relevant, as that is the way the game comes down, or that's the way the game resolves, is by milling out your opponents, getting rid of all their cards in their deck, and letting them take 3 per draw. Now, what's really cool about Restock here is the only way to deal with a control mirror is to either mill your opponent's Restock or discard your opponent's Restock from the top of their deck, or to hit it with a discard spell. So one of the other cards that we've been seeing is a double off aspect Spark Rebellion Splash in your sideboard in order for you to pull their Restock out of their hand. And I've been running 1 to 2 Spark Rebellions in my sideboard, and my goodness, I did not think I'd be paying 6 for a Spark Rebellion, but you absolutely want to in this control mirror. The thing about Restock, and the reason why those are the only two ways to deal with it, is because the way the rules are in Star Wars Unlimited, you actually go ahead and discard your Restock when you play Restock before Restock resolves. So you pay 1 resource for the event, it discards, it goes to your discard pile, and then you resolve the effect of Restock, which is you may choose up to 4 cards in discard pile and you put them on the bottom of their owner's deck. So you could choose Restock. So essentially you choose Restock and you choose 3 copies of Vigilance, put them on the bottom of your deck, and suddenly you're back in the mill game plan. So you must deal with your opponent's Restock some other way, in that they won't just mill out or run out of cards in their deck because they could constantly restock their restock. And that is one reason why you want to run multiple, not just one, because they can potentially be discarded by a Vigilance or taken from your hand from Spark of Rebellion. Now, the reason why this is, as I mentioned earlier, is the threat density isn't high enough in these control mirrors. Sometimes even in the more go big mid-range mirrors, things like Avenger, things like Emperor Palpatine, not only just get killed from potentially things like Power of the Dark Side, Vanquish, or whatever it is, they also just oftentimes get answered by the mirror card. And that's something that ends up being very consistent. So the way you break that mirror is by dealing with your opponent's deck rather than your opponent's units, because their units oftentimes are very easy to deal with, as you have oftentimes a huge density of ways to deal with units in your hand, as you are playing a control deck. And if you're in the control mirror, as any of you have played, if you're familiar with like Magic or other TCGs, you oftentimes have 4 to 5 to 6 cards in your hand that do absolutely nothing against your opponent because they're playing a control deck. And that is where Vigilance comes in and Restock. This is a card that you do not want to sleep on. This is a card that you at least want to run one copy between your main or side if you're playing a control deck. I recommend 2 to 3 copies. Again, this is the card that's going to give you the advantage in the control mirror if you are playing control at all. But what if you're not playing control and you see all these control decks running around? You're like, oh my goodness, you just spent 6 minutes talking about Restock and how it's good in the control mirror and blah 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 blah. What about me as a Sabine Green player or a Boba Green player, or whatever it is? How do I deal with these control decks? Well, I got another colorless card for you that I want to talk about. Yes, that's right, it's Confiscate. I could not believe my own deck building choices when I decided to put 2 to 3 of these in my sideboard when I was playing Leia Red, Sabine Green, and even in some cases other matchups like Boba Green and Boba Yellow. I've tried it all, and this card has performed extremely well for me. The reason being, you want to hit, of course, not a shield token, not an experience token, and that's kind of where my thought or my brain went immediately when I saw this card initially, back when I first started playing Star Wars Unlimited, I don't know, like months ago. You want to hit things like Entrenched, Traitorous, or in some cases like a Jedi lightsaber or Fallen lightsaber. That's not terrible, but you really want to be hitting Entrenched and Traitorous. And this is the reason why Confiscate ends up being a more aggro-centric card, as well, the decks that are playing Traitorous and Entrenched, well, Entrenched specifically, you don't really play Entrenched unless you're playing a control deck. And if you're playing Traitorous, you're probably a mid-range deck, probably something that, is interested in kind of getting back tempo and actually beating down your opponent with a bunch of units. In some cases, you play it in Boba Green. You could find it in like Luke Green mid-range lists. You could even find it in some more aggressive lists. I've even seen Sabine Green players run a copy of this. Confiscate absolutely ruins these cards, because these cards don't actually deal with your unit. They just prevent from them or from you hitting them with it. And in some cases, you could say Traitorous does deal with the unit, but it's at least on the battlefield and it doesn't exhaust the unit, which is really important. So if you're on turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, whatever it is, and your opponent plays Entrenched, particularly this one oftentimes goes on your leader, and you respond with a Confiscate, you could oftentimes completely ruin your opponent's math on how they're going to survive through the next couple of turns. Oftentimes, Entrenched is used in conjunction with either Super Laser Blast or just a way to deal with one side of the arena, and Entrenched deals with the other, right? Let's say you have units to trade off with on the ground arena with Child Sin, for example, and then you entrench the space arena because you do not have anything to deal with it. This Confiscate allows you to get in for a lot of additional damage because it always trades up with resources on either of these 2 cards, but basically any upgrade that anyone is playing, and allows you to still hit their base. That's the key part of this. This ends up being one of the reactive cards that allows you to still get in for what you're trying to go for, which is damage on your opponent's base. And in Traitorous' case, oh man, it is an absolute blowout when you confiscate Traitorous, trading up on resources by 4, and then also make another play. I can't tell you how many times I'm fighting against like Boba Green, for example, or maybe I'm fighting like Krennic Green and they're trying to, Traitorous my units, or Vader Green or Luke Green and they Traitorous, whatever it is. Let's say I have a Fighters for Freedom out, or I have a Millennium Falcon or a Wing Leader, and they go Traitorous. I respond with confiscate your Traitorous, get back my readied up unit, and then attack into your base, follow it up with a K2SO or some sort of other 4 resource play. Heck, if they go Traitorous first off, because a lot of the times when you're fighting against control decks, they don't want to deploy their removal spells until they see the best option to go for. So sometimes they'll pass. But when you have something like a Traitorous or an Entrench, you oftentimes drop it immediately before someone can attack with it, because, well, Traitorous case, you might be able to attack their units with it, and Entrenched case, well, you could just deal with their unit immediately, whereas some other removal spells, yes, you might want to drop them immediately, but oftentimes Traitorous or Entrenched comes down as soon as the turn starts. It means that they're tapped out, most likely, so you can like confiscate something, play a General Dodonna, and suddenly you've pumped up all your units, including the unit that was Traitorous, and you get to hit in, and that's oftentimes the swing that you need. It is these types of cards that allow you to trade up on resources that make Boba Fett so powerful. Boba Fett as a leader allows you to deal with your opponent's units and get resources back, and so you're essentially always trading ahead on resources, and that's exactly what Confiscate aims to do. Now, I will mention there are a couple cards that deal with upgrades, but how does this compare to something like a Disabling Fangfighter, which has been in the sideboard over the past couple of weeks or months, or whatever you want to talk about, with Sabine Green and more aggressive slanted, obviously aggression focused units? I've actually really found Confiscate just to fit better in the Disabling Fangfighter role, as most often if you're playing Disabling Fangfighter, it's going to be in the sideboard of your Sabine Green, your Leia Red, although I've seen it in things like Chirrut Red, or your Grand Inquisitor. You could play in any aggression deck. But the thing with Disabling Fangfighter is that you get the defeat and upgrade, but it still costs you 3 resources, albeit you do get a 3/2 for your troubles. The thing with Confiscate is it allows you to remain true to your game plan for 1 resource, whereas Disabling Fangfighter kind of gives you a mediocre body and allows you to potentially get in for some damage, but it's oftentimes off your game plan, with the exception of defeating that upgrade to keep with your own game plan. And what I mean by this is you oftentimes don't want to be playing like a Mandalorian space unit that doesn't have heroism in your Sabine Green or Leia Red decks. It lowers your For a Cause I Believe In's. It doesn't work with General Dodonna. It might not work with Rebel Assault. It doesn't work with potentially Red 3. It just does not really do a whole lot for you as a unit. It just hits in for 3 points of damage. And the thing is that when you're going ahead and trying to disrupt your opponent's game plan while progress your own, being able to just trade up on resources by a lot, even without getting the additional body, is extremely valuable, because at this point of the game, you probably have a couple of additional cards that can leverage it. And honestly, in some cases, I even run a split between Confiscate and Disabling Fangfighter. I think the other options that you do have in the game right now are a lot weaker. You have things like Bamboozle or Power Failure. Power Failure is a 2 resource defeat any amount of upgrades, I believe on a single target. I don't remember exactly what that card was, but regardless, that card is higher resource in a specific aspect and doesn't give you a body. So I would not run that, even though it does have the upside of defeating multiple upgrades. On Bamboozle's case, it is in an awkward color where you're exhausting and returning the upgrades to your opponent's hand, and in that case, you might just want to waylay it, and so that doesn't really deal with the upgrade, as You want to keep your units readied and deal with things like entrenched and traitorous as the two specific cases. Similar to why Restock is good, a lot of these cards are now being run more and more frequently. In Traitorous' case, it's been run for like ever. It's just a really strong card, but Entrenched in particular has been a more popular addition to all these decks, and mainly because of these bad boys right here, your Restock Vigilance Avenger decks coming into play and kind of dominating the field. So pretty interesting stuff that I've gone to gotten to test over the past couple of weeks, in particular as the meta has changed drastically, from not really fighting any deck that could really leverage Restock to a lot of random players playing a lot of decks that Restock ends up being really good in. Not to say that I have never played Restock before, but it was that the overall player base that I have played against, or the random people that are playing either in the shops that I play in or online that I play, didn't really make sense to run Restock and didn't really make sense to run Confiscate, but now it does. So let me know what you think about these two cards, and then a few things that you might have noticed in the comment section down below. Have you tried running Confiscate? Have you run Restock? Restock was a good one. Trust me. Let me know. And of course, use my TCG play link if you want to pick up any of these cards. And I will see you for a video.